Donald Trump is on track for a historic landslide victory in the 2024 presidential election. He's leading in all the polls, but it wasn't always like this. If you remember back in 2020, Joe Biden was ahead by ridiculous margins throughout the election cycle. Exactly 4 years ago, on October 17th, 2020, Joe Biden led by 10.7% in the national polling average. He eventually won the popular vote by just 4.5, which means that polling overestimated support for Democrats by a whopping 6.2 percentage points. And today we're going to be taking a look at the 2024 polling, but adjusting it for the 2020 era and filling in the map just so that you guys can visualize how strong of a position Trump is in right now with less than 20 days to go until November 5th. And so with all these solid states filled in, we're only going to focus on the races that will actually be competitive, the races that will actually matter, and we're going to start in the Midwest. This is where the election will be decided. These are the most important states on the map, and we're going to begin in Minnesota, a state that no Democrat has lost since 1972. Today, Kamala Harris leads by 4.7% in the polling average, but if Democrats are overestimated by 6.2 percentage points again, then Trump would be on track to win the state by 1.5, and this is definitely not impossible. Just look at what happened in 2016. Hillary Clinton only won Minnesota by 1.5 percentage points. Trump winning it by that same margin is definitely within the realm of possibility. And so right off the bat, Minnesota is going to be a lean red state. Any state that is on track to go in favor of either candidate by 10 points or more is going to be solid. Anything 5 points or more is going to be likely. 1 to 5 is lean, and any margin less than 1% is going to be categorized as tilt. Next up in Iowa, polls have Trump leading by 4%, but adjusting for the error, Trump is going to win the state by 10.2%. He won it by 9 in 2016 and by 8 in 2020. There's no doubt he can win Iowa by a solid double-digit margin. And then in Wisconsin, this is one of the most competitive states in the country, at least based on the pure data. Harris actually has a 0.3% lead. This is the only battleground state where she still maintains a slight advantage based on just the polling average. The three most recent polls show a tie, but just look at how much polling overestimated Democrats in the last two elections. Clinton was supposed to win Wisconsin by 6 points in 2016. She lost the state entirely. Biden was supposed to win by 6.3. He won the state by just 0.6. And today, the adjusted margin has the former president ahead by 5.9. So Wisconsin isn't even going to be close. It's going to be likely red on our map. In neighboring Michigan, Trump is also dominating here. In 2020, it was the most liberal of all the swing states. Biden carried the Wolverine state by 2.8. But today, Democrats are behind in the polls. Trump leads by a 1% margin. He's ahead in a majority of the recent polls, and there's no doubt he is the clear favorite to flip Michigan, a state he won very narrowly back in 2016 by just 0.2%. But again, just like in Wisconsin, the polling heavily overestimated Democrats in the last two elections. In 2016, Clinton was supposed to win by 11.4% based on the pure data. She didn't even win the state. Biden also massively underperformed, and so the 2024 adjusted margin shows Trump leading by 7.2. Michigan is also going to be likely Republican. And then in Ohio, the Buckeye State, Trump flipped in 2016. It's been red ever since. He's going to win it by a double-digit margin this time around. He already leads by 7.4% in the polls. Adjusting for the 2020 error, Trump is on track to carry the state by 13.6. Buckeye State is going to be solid red for the first time in nearly 3 decades. Before we continue, nearly 3/4 of you guys are not subscribed, so please take the time to subscribe right now for more content like this leading up to the election in November, and join my Discord server to chat with me personally, link in the description below. And then now to finish up the Rust Belt in the Keystone State of Pennsylvania, Trump leads by 0.3% in the polling average. He's already dominating. He leads in an overwhelming majority of the polls. This is probably going to be the most right-leaning of the three former blue wall states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And adjusting for the 2020 error, Trump is going to carry Pennsylvania by 6.5%. And just like in its two neighbors, Democrats have been heavily overestimated here. Hillary Clinton was supposed to win the state by 7% in 2016, and once again, she didn't even win it. And so the polls showing a tie right now, basically, between Harris and Trump is a very good sign for the former president. For the first time, he isn't getting blown out in the polling averages, even though every single time he does quite well. I mean, in 2016, he literally won the election when the polls had him going down in a landslide to Hillary Clinton. And then in 2020, Biden was supposed to win by an even larger landslide, but he barely won the election. It was Georgia, Wisconsin, and Arizona. If these three states, which all went to Biden by less than 0.7%, if he had lost these three states, he would have lost the entire election. And today, Trump is in a much better position. Pennsylvania, just like Wisconsin and Michigan, is going to be likely red. In the 2nd district of Nebraska, Kamala Harris leads by 10 points. The adjusted margin has her up by 3.8. It's going to be lean blue in favor of Harris. And then moving up to the Northeast, Kamala Harris is going to win New York by 13.5 points based solely on the polling. This is already the worst performance for any Democrat since 1988. I mean, just compared to Biden's 23-point victory in the state back in 2020. With the adjusted margin, Harris leads by just 7.3. The Empire State is going to be likely blue. And then in New Hampshire, the vice president leads by 7.4%. With the margin adjusted, she's ahead by just 1.2. The state is nearly as competitive as it was in 2016, when Hillary Clinton only won the Granite State by 0.37. So this might seem like a bit of a stretch, but yes, New Hampshire can get very, very competitive, especially when Trump is on the ballot. So it's going to be lean blue on the map, barely above the 1-point threshold to avoid being tilt. And then up in Maine, Kamala Harris leads by 11.7 on average, although this is a very flawed polling average. The UNH poll is ridiculous. Kamala Harris has no chance of winning the state by a double-digit margin, much less 17, but the adjusted margin has Harris leading by 5.5, so Maine is going to be likely blue. We're now going to move down into the Sun Belt. This is basically the second theater of this election, if you could call it. We essentially have one fight in the Midwest for Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and now Minnesota has become competitive as well. And then down south, we have the Sun Belt, which generally has been controlled by Republicans. I mean, just look at 2012, 2016. It's been pretty red down here. But in 2020, Joe Biden flipped Georgia and Arizona. It was a strong finish for the Democrats, but that's probably not going to be repeated by Kamala Harris this time around. And so starting off in Virginia, Harris leads by 6.4% in the polling average. The adjusted margin has her ahead by just 0.2, which means she is barely going to cross the finish line with the narrowest victory possible. Just 0.2% separate the vice president and the former president. Virginia is going to be very, very competitive this election cycle, and it's going to be tilt blue. It doesn't get any more competitive than this. Before we continue, I want to tell you guys about Polymarket, the world's largest prediction market, where you can track election results and instantly see who's leading. These odds react in real time to current events instead of days later like the polls. There's no bias or media spin, just pure data. The market odds reflect the collective analysis, beliefs, and wisdom of thousands of traders reacting to world events. Polymarket has also recently launched a mobile app where you can access their 2024 election forecast on the go. Make sure you check them out at polymarket.com and visit the App Store to download their new app. Continuing on down to North Carolina, Trump won the Tar Heel State's 16 electoral votes in both 2016 and 2020. Today, he leads by 1.2% in the polling average. He's ahead in every single poll with the exception of this recent Quinnipiac poll, which was conducted with a very left-leaning sample. Polls here in both 2016 and 2020 showed Democrats on track to win. Of course, that never actually happened. And today, Trump's adjusted margin is double his margin from 2016. When he won the state by just 3.7. So based on the new numbers, North Carolina is going to be likely red, just like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Trump is dominating in virtually every single swing state. Next up in Georgia, we have the most competitive race of the 2020 cycle. It was decided by less than a quarter of a percentage point. Joe Biden won Georgia by 0.24%. It was the first time a Democrat ever won the Peach State, going all the way back to 1992. And yes, Biden did do well in Georgia 4 years ago, but Kamala Harris isn't even close to the quality of candidate that Biden was back in the last election. Joe Biden was a strong performing nominee. He won in a very crowded primary field, and one of the issues that Democrats are now realizing they have with Harris is that she is not an effective campaigner. Now that she has lost the momentum she had when she first entered the race, she is flopping both in debates and in interviews. She simply isn't campaigning as well as she needs to. She's not as likable as Democrats would want her to be. She also made a mistake choosing Tim Walz to be her running mate. She should have gone with Josh Shapiro. Democrats were overconfident back in August when things looked pretty good for them when they were leading in the polls. That obviously is no longer the case. Trump today leads by 0.9% in Georgia. With the adjusted margin, he's on track to win the state by a whopping 7.1%, outdoing even his 2016 margin when he defeated Clinton here by 5 points. And so Georgia is going to also be likely red on this map. In Florida, this used to always be one of the states talked about the most. It's always been extremely competitive. I mean, just look at the election of 2000. It was decided by 0.009%. Just 537 votes decided the election in favor of Bush over Gore. In 2012, it was tilt blue in favor of Obama. This was the last time Democrats won the Sunshine State. In 2016, Trump won it by a tilt margin. But in 2020, when everybody thought Biden would win Florida back, Trump did even better than he did previously, carrying Florida by 3.5 percentage points. Today, Florida is significantly more Republican than it was even 4 years ago. In 2022, Ron DeSantis won his re-election as governor by a 19-point margin. There's no doubt that Republicans now control Florida, and according to the polling average, Trump leads by 6.1%. Obviously, the presidential race is going to be a lot closer than the Senate or governor elections back in 2022. The adjusted margin has Trump up by 12.3. Florida is going to be solid red on this map. Next up, in Texas, we have a race that Democrats simply are not going to win. Donald Trump is leading by 6 points in the polls, his margin from 2020. But 4 years ago, the polls had Trump winning Texas by just 1%. Today, he's actually leading in the polls by his margin from the last election, and the adjusted margin has Trump ahead by a double-digit lead. And so Trump is no doubt going to win Texas, and Republicans are going to continue winning Texas for elections to come. Yes, the state is generally shifting to the left, but think about just how many people live in Texas. It has 40 electoral votes. Only California has more. It's going to take decades for Democrats to actually win Texas, and by the time that happens, the Midwest is going to be reliably red and hand Republicans even more electoral votes. And so today, Texas is going to be solid red based on the adjusted margin. Continuing westward to Colorado and New Mexico, we have two races that Joe Biden won easily by double-digit margins in the last election. Colorado, he won by 14, New Mexico by 11. Today, these two races are incredibly competitive. In Colorado, the adjusted margin has Harris leading by just 4.8%. It is going to be a lean blue state and the most competitive it's been since the early 2000s. And then in New Mexico, Kamala Harris leads by 8 points on average, but with the adjusted margin, she's ahead by just 1.8. New Mexico is also going to be lean blue, barely missing out on being a tilt state altogether. Virginia is going to be close. Colorado and New Mexico will not be too far behind it. And then in Arizona, we have another state Biden won in the last election. Just like Georgia, it was incredibly competitive. It was actually the second closest state on the entire map. It was the first time Democrats won Arizona since 1996. But just like in Georgia, Kamala Harris is not going to replicate Biden's success. She isn't even leading in the polls. In fact, she's down by over 1%. Trump leads by 1.1 in the polling average. The latest New York Times poll even has him ahead by 5 points. The adjusted margin shows Trump on track to win by 7.3. There's no doubt Arizona is going to be a red state, and it's going to be likely Republican based on our margins. And last but not least, we have Nevada. It is not going to single-handedly decide the election. It's a swing state, but it only has 6 electoral votes. There's no realistic scenario where either Harris or Trump actually need Nevada in order to win the election. But a victory for Trump in the Silver State would be a huge symbolic victory, just like Minnesota would. Nevada hasn't gone red since 2004. George W. Bush was the last GOP candidate to actually win the state. It flipped blue in 2008. Obama carried it by nearly 13 points. He won it by 7 in 2012, and then in both 2016 and 2020, Democrats carried it by 2.4. Now, in 2022, Republicans actually won the governorship in Nevada. It is a state that is shifting more and more to the right, and Trump has a very good chance of actually flipping it. Based on the polling average, he is on track to win. He leads by half a percentage point, and based on the adjusted margin, Trump is on track to defeat Harris in the state by a whopping 6.7%. So the Silver State is also going to be likely Republican on the map. And so based on the 2024 polls adjusted for the 2020 error, Donald Trump is on track to win 322 electoral votes, winning all the swing states easily, also flipping Minnesota, becoming the first Republican to win the state in 52 years. Kamala Harris is barely going to hold on to states like Virginia, New Mexico, and New Hampshire. It would be a very competitive election. Now, some of you guys might be saying that this is ridiculous, and it is true that this is not a likely scenario, but if you go back to 2020, this is what the polls were projecting for Joe Biden. He was supposed to win 330, sometimes even upwards of 360 electoral votes. That was how ridiculous it was. The polling overestimated Democrats so much in the last election, and the point of this video is to show you guys in context of the errors that have been made in the past, just how well Trump is truly doing. He really is on a pathway to victory, even if it isn't by the margins you see on this screen. So thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe right now for more content like this leading up to the election in November, and follow me on Twitter for daily political updates. Link in the description below.